You know, there's something about luxury watches that catches people's attention. Rolex, Patek, Audemars, these aren't just timepieces, they're status symbols. They say, "I've made it," but when police knocked on Kieran Leonard's door in the quiet village of Blackrod, Bolton, and found 3 Rolex watches worth over £80,000, they weren't celebrating success. They were looking at the price tag of misery. This is the story of how a 6-month police investigation brought down a cocaine empire operating right in the heart of Greater Manchester. It's a story of 3 men, 14 kilograms of cocaine, and the lavish lifestyle that ultimately led to their downfall. This is the case of Kieran Leonard and his gang. If you're watching and haven't already, hit subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Let me take you back to November 2023. While most of us were thinking about Christmas shopping and winter holidays, detectives at Greater Manchester Police's Bolton Challenger unit were noticing something troubling. Intelligence was coming in about large quantities of cocaine flooding into the Bolton and Bury areas. Now, drug dealing isn't new to any major city, but this wasn't your typical street corner operation. We're talking about wholesale quantities, kilograms of cocaine being moved, broken down, and distributed across the region. Someone was running a sophisticated supply network, and the police wanted to know who. The Bolton Challenger unit, part of GMP's program Challenger initiative that targets serious and organized crime, launched a covert investigation. And when I say covert, I mean they were working in the shadows. Surveillance, intelligence gathering, building a picture piece by piece. Think of it like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, except the pieces keep moving, and nobody wants you to see the final picture. Over the next 6 months, from November 2023 through to May 2024, the detectives started connecting the dots. They identified a pattern, money flowing one way, drugs flowing the other. And at the center of it all, 3 names kept appearing: Kieran Leonard, Rhys Shaw, and Mark Cosgrave. But here's the thing about drug investigations. Knowing someone's involved and proving it in court are 2 very different things. The police needed evidence, hard, undeniable evidence that would stand up in front of a judge and jury. So they watched, they gathered intelligence, they built their case. And by May 2024, they were ready to strike. It's the 10th of May, 2024. The sun's barely up, and most people in Bolton and Bury are still asleep or just starting their morning routines. But for the officers of the Bolton Challenger unit, this is game time. They'd spent months preparing for this moment, coordinating multiple simultaneous raids, making sure every detail was perfect. In operations, like this, timing is everything. You hit all the targets at once, before anyone can warn the others or destroy evidence. Let's start with Mark Cosgrave, the oldest member of the gang at 52 years old. Officers descended on his home on Medlock Way in Bury early that morning. The video footage from the raid tells you everything you need to know about how unexpected this was. Cosgrave was still in bed when police entered his home.
Mark, listen to what I've got to say, mate.
Yeah.
This moment in time, you're under arrest, okay, pal?
Yeah.
Conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, okay?
Yeah.
So you don't have to say anything, but it may be defensive. You don't mention when questioned. Something that shall later line in court, and if you do say maybe given evidence, you understand that?
Yeah.
Okay, it's for a prompt and effective investigation.
That is the reality when you choose a life of crime. One moment you're sleeping, the next there are police officers in your bedroom telling you you're under arrest for drug offences. But it wasn't just Cosgrave they found in that house. The search revealed cocaine worth over £24,000. And it gets more interesting. They also found adulterants, substances used to dilute or cut the cocaine to make it go further and increase profits. Plus, and this is crucial, they found a hydraulic press. Now, you might be wondering, what's a hydraulic press doing in a drug dealer's house? Well, here's how the operation worked. After cocaine is diluted with adulterants, it becomes powder, but dealers often want it in block form for easier transport and distribution. That's where the hydraulic press comes in. It compresses the diluted cocaine back into solid blocks. It's essentially a drug production line, right there in a residential street in Bury. Meanwhile, across town in Bury, Rhys Shaw was also being arrested at his home on Albert Road. He was 34 years old and, as police would later establish, Leonard's right-hand man. When officers searched his property, they found £7,000 in cash. Not in a bank account, mind you, just cash, sitting in his home. Try explaining that to the taxman, but the biggest catch of the day was Kieran Leonard himself. Leonard lived in Causton Grove, Blackrod, a pleasant area of Bolton, the kind of place where you wouldn't expect to find the head of a drug gang. He was 31 years old at the time, and he was about to have a very bad day. Officers spotted Leonard in his Volkswagen and moved in to arrest him. And we actually have body-worn camera footage of this moment, which gives us a fascinating glimpse into Leonard's state of mind.
So you've been arrested,
right,
on suspicion of being concerned.
Suspicion?
Yeah, of being concerned in the supply of Class A drugs and conspiracy to supply Class A drugs as well.
Why on?
Pardon?
Why on?
We'll tell you later on.
I know it.
Alright, so you don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you don't mention when questioned.
That's fine.
Something which you may later on in court. Anything you do, say maybe give evidence, okay?
As officers explain why he's being arrested, Leonard keeps asking, "Why though? Why though?" There's something almost surreal about that response. Here's a man who's been running a cocaine supply network for months, and he seems genuinely confused about why the police might be interested in him. Whether that's genuine confusion, denial, or just shock, we'll never know. But it's been burned into the case record forever. The search of Leonard's home in Blackrod revealed something that would become central to the case. Those 3 Rolex watches, worth more than £80,000 combined. Think about that for a moment. £80,000 on your wrist. That's more than many people earn in 2 years, just sitting on one person's arm. These weren't the only luxury items police found. Evidence showed Leonard was living what they described as a lavish lifestyle. Designer clothes, luxury holidays, expensive cars, all the trappings of wealth. But here's the question that was probably running through everyone's mind. Where does a 31-year-old from Bolton get the money for 3 Rolex watches? The answer, police alleged, was simple: cocaine. Now that all 3 men were in custody, detectives could start piecing together exactly how this operation worked. And what they found was a textbook example of an organized drug supply chain. Let me break down how this gang operated, because it's actually quite sophisticated. At the top, you had Kyron Leonard. Think of him as the CEO of this criminal enterprise. He was the one organizing the influx of large quantities of cocaine into the region. He arranged the purchases, likely from suppliers further up the chain that police may still be investigating. He provided the financing, and he took the lion's share of the profits. Leonard was the orchestrator, the one calling the shots. He instructed the others on what to do, when to collect cash, when to move drugs. He was living that lavish lifestyle on the proceeds, turning drug money into Rolex watches and luxury holidays. Then you had Reece Shaw, Leonard's right-hand man. Shaw was the operational guy, the one actually out there doing the legwork. His job was to supply the street-level dealers and collect the cash from drug sales. Think of him as the middle management, taking orders from Leonard and making sure they got carried out. Shaw was essentially the link between the wholesale operation Leonard ran and the actual street dealers selling to users. He'd deliver drugs to dealers, collect their payments, and bring the money back up the chain. It's a crucial role in any drug operation, and that £7,000 in cash found at his home shows he was handling significant amounts of money. And finally, you had Mark Cosgrave, the oldest member at 52. His role was different but equally important. Cosgrave was the production guy, the one who handled the drugs themselves. His job was threefold: storage, dilution, and repackaging. The cocaine would come to Cosgrave's address in large quantities. He'd store it there, which is risky because if police come knocking, you're caught red-handed, which is exactly what happened. Then he'd use those adulterants to dilute the cocaine, stretching it out to maximize profits. Finally, he'd use that hydraulic press to repackage everything into blocks ready for distribution. It's like a little factory, turning expensive wholesale cocaine into even more expensive retail cocaine by diluting it and pressing it back into sellable form. According to the evidence police gathered, during those 6 months between November 2023 and May 2024, this operation moved about 14 kilograms of cocaine. That's roughly 30 pounds of pure cocaine, though by the time it was cut with adulterants, the amount hitting the streets would have been significantly more. To put that in perspective, a gram of cocaine on UK streets might cost anywhere from £40 to £100, depending on quality and location. 14 kilograms is 14,000 grams. Even at the lower end of street prices, we're talking about potential street value in the hundreds of thousands of pounds. No wonder Leonard could afford those Rolex watches. After their arrests in May 2024, all 3 men were charged with being concerned in the supply of cocaine, a Class A drug, under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971. Now, let me explain what being concerned in the supply actually means, because it's broader than you might think. In UK law, you don't have to be the person actually handing drugs to users to be guilty of drug supply offences. If you're involved in any part of the supply chain, organising logistics, providing storage, facilitating communications, financing the operation, you can be charged with being concerned in the supply. This is crucial because it means everyone in the chain shares responsibility. You can't just say, well, I only stored it, or I only collected the money. If you're part of the supply network, you're culpable, and the sentences reflect that. For Class A drugs like cocaine, which the law treats as the most serious category, the maximum sentence is life imprisonment. Even people playing relatively minor roles can face 7 years or more. Major organisers can get sentences exceeding 20 years. The courts look at several factors when sentencing: how much drug was involved, what was your role, were you part of an organised crime group, did you exploit vulnerable people? All of these can increase your sentence. All 3 men were remanded in custody, meaning they were held in jail while awaiting trial. And here's something interesting: they all pleaded guilty. Now, in the criminal justice system, pleading guilty can sometimes get you a reduced sentence because it saves the time and expense of a trial and shows some acceptance of responsibility. But even with any reduction for guilty pleas, the sentences handed down were substantial. Kieron Leonard, as the organiser and primary beneficiary of the operation, received the longest sentence, 14 years and 3 months in prison. That's longer than many people spend in their entire careers at one company. Leonard won't see freedom until he's in his mid-40s at the earliest. Rhys Shaw, the right-hand man who handled distribution and collections, received 7 years and 6 months. And Mark Cosgrave, who stored and prepared the drugs, got 6 years and 9 months. All told, that's more than 28 years of prison time handed out between the 3 of them. The sentencing happened in 2025 at a Manchester court, and on the 7th of November 2025, Greater Manchester Police publicly released details of the investigation and the sentences. But this case isn't just about 3 men from Bolton and Bury. It's part of something much bigger. The Bolton Challenger unit that investigated this case is part of Programme Challenger, which is Greater Manchester Police's comprehensive response to serious and organised crime across the region. Programme Challenger targets all sorts of offences: county lines, drug dealing, exploitation of children and vulnerable adults, modern slavery, economic crime, firearms offences. It's a multi-agency effort that recognises organised crime isn't just one thing. It's interconnected networks of criminality that need coordinated responses. And they're busy. In March 2025, just a few months before the sentencing in this case, GMP's City of Manchester Challenger unit executed 10 simultaneous warrants across Longside, Ardwick and Northmoor. They seized Class A drugs, zombie knives, a Breitling watch, another luxury timepiece, notice the pattern, and arrested 7 people. Detective Inspector Christopher Woodburn, speaking about that operation, emphasized that the aim is to disrupt and dismantle organized crime gangs, and that intelligence from the community is vital. That last point is crucial: intelligence from the community. After the sentencing of Leonard, Shaw and Cosgrave, Detective Inspector Waywell of the Bolton Challenger unit made a public statement. He said he was pleased with the outcome and that it should send a stark message to those considering drug offences. But then he said something really important. He stressed that the team will always pursue and actively target those involved in the supply of drugs, and that such criminality causes misery and often involves the exploitation of children and vulnerable people. It's easy to look at this case and just see 3 men who got caught and went to prison. But behind those 14 kilograms of cocaine are real victims, people struggling with addiction, families torn apart, young people, sometimes children, exploited as drug runners, violence on the streets as different gangs compete for territory. That's what Detective Inspector Waywell means when he talks about misery. Drug supply isn't a victimless crime, even when the dealers themselves look like respectable people living in nice houses in places like Blackrod. Waywell also urged members of the public to continue providing intelligence to the police, emphasizing that community information is vital to investigations. And that makes sense when you think about it. Police can't be everywhere. They can't see everything. But communities know when something's not right. They notice patterns. They see people living beyond their means, suspicious activity, comings and goings at odd hours. The investigation into Leonard, Shaw, and Cosgrave likely started with intelligence from people who noticed something was off. Someone saw something and said something, and that eventually led to 3 drug dealers going to prison for a combined 28 years. So what can we learn from the downfall of the Blackrod dealer? First, there's the obvious lesson about crime and punishment. Leonard, Shaw, and Cosgrave probably thought they were being clever. They had their roles clearly defined. They were making serious money. Leonard was enjoying his Rolex watches and luxury lifestyle. But here's the thing about organized crime. The more organized it is, the more evidence you create. Every transaction, every phone call, every movement of drugs or money creates a trail. And modern police forces are good at following trails. 6 months of surveillance and intelligence gathering was all it took to build a case strong enough that all 3 men pleaded guilty. They knew the evidence was overwhelming. Second, there's a lesson about lifestyle. Those Rolex watches that looked so good on Leonard's wrist, they became exhibits in a criminal case, evidence of unexplained wealth, proof that his legitimate income couldn't possibly account for his lifestyle. In the criminal world, there's an old saying, "Don't let your lifestyle write checks your cover story can't cash." Leonard's lifestyle was writing very large checks indeed, and when police came asking questions, there was no legitimate explanation for where the money came from. Third, and perhaps most importantly, there's a lesson about consequences. These 3 men didn't just hurt themselves. Think about all the people who bought the cocaine they supplied. Think about the families affected by addiction. Think about any violence that might have occurred in their distribution network. Drug supply creates ripples of harm that spread far beyond the dealers themselves, and that's why the sentences are so severe. The courts recognize that these crimes, while they might look like simple business transactions to the people involved, cause genuine harm to communities. Detective Inspector Waywell's comment about exploitation of children and vulnerable adults isn't just rhetoric. County Line's drug dealing, which program Challenger targets, often involves gangs from cities recruiting teenagers from smaller towns to transport and sell drugs. These young people get criminal records, get involved in violence, have their lives derailed, all to make people like Leonard, Shaw, and Cosgrave richer. The seizure of high-value watches, cash, and drugs in this case also highlights something important about modern policing: asset confiscation. It's not enough just to put drug dealers in prison. If they get to keep their ill-gotten gains, what message does that send? That crime pays, as long as you're willing to do the time. No. Modern asset confiscation laws allow police to seize property that's been purchased with the proceeds of crime. Those Rolex watches, gone. The cash, seized. The luxury items, confiscated. It's about removing the financial incentive for crime and making sure criminals don't get to enjoy their profits, either now or when they eventually get out of prison. So here we are, at the end of the story of Kieran Leonard and his cocaine supply network in Bolton and Bury. What started as intelligence reports about drugs flooding into the area ended with 3 men facing decades behind bars. 14 kilograms of cocaine taken off the streets. Over £80,000 worth of luxury watches seized. Thousands in cash confiscated. It's a dramatic story, but it's also a familiar one. Drug supply networks get set up, they operate for a while, police investigate, arrests are made, and the cycle starts over somewhere else with someone else. But each case matters. Each investigation disrupts a network. Each conviction sends a message. And each seizure of drugs is drugs that won't make it onto the streets, into people's bodies, into their bloodstreams, into their lives. For the residents of Blackrod, Bolton, and Bury, the removal of this supply network means a safer community. For the police officers who spent 6 months building this case, it means justice done. For the courts who sentenced these men, it means upholding the law and protecting society. And for Kieran Leonard, Rhys Shaw, and Mark Cosgrave, it means years behind bars to reflect on the choices that led them to run a cocaine empire from the streets of Greater Manchester. Those Rolex watches might have looked impressive once upon a time, but in the end, they became nothing more than evidence tags in a police property room, and their owner became prisoner number whatever he was assigned, with more than 14 years to serve. That's the real price of the lavish lifestyle. And it's a price that keeps getting paid day after day, year after year, behind prison walls. This has been the story of the Blackrod drug dealer, a crime of ambition, greed, organized crime, and ultimately justice. Thanks for watching.
They say I go by LankyPanda, but that doesn't matter. This is my downfall.
The downfall of this criminal starts with a man in his home in Bootle, watching police officers deal with a car crash outside his house. He thinks it's funny, so he pulls out his phone and takes a few pictures. He sends them to his mates with a joke about the police being everywhere. Just a normal day, right? Except this man isn't normal. He's running an £18.5 million drug empire. And those photos, they're about to destroy everything he's built. This is the story of Michael McNally, a quiet man from Merseyside who thought he was untouchable. He used military-grade encryption, changed his locations constantly, and moved millions of pounds worth of cocaine and heroin across the country. But one simple mistake, one moment of carelessness, brought the entire operation crashing down. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why even the most sophisticated criminals can't escape the long arm of the law. Before we dive into how McNally's world fell apart, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss the other stories we've got coming. The cases get darker, the criminals get bolder, and the investigations get even more shocking. Now let's get into it. Let's go back to early 2020. The country's in lockdown. Streets are empty. Everyone's stuck at home watching the news about this virus that's turned the world upside down. But while most people are worried about toilet paper and keeping 2 meters apart, Michael McNally sees something different. He sees opportunity. Think about it. Empty roads, police focused on lockdown enforcement, couriers who can pretend to be key workers. It's the perfect time to move drugs, and McNally isn't just moving a bit of gear for his mates down the pub. No, this man is shifting industrial quantities. We're talking kilograms of cocaine and heroin, week after week, from March through to June 2020. The value? Roughly £18.5 million in just 3 months. But here's where it gets interesting. McNally knows he needs to stay invisible. He can't just text his dealers on WhatsApp or ring them up for a chat about drug prices. The police would be all over that in seconds. So he does what hundreds of criminals across Europe were doing at the time. He buys an EncroChat phone. Now, if you've never heard of EncroChat, let me explain. This wasn't your standard iPhone or Samsung. This was a subscription service specifically designed for criminals. We're talking military-grade encryption, messages that self-destruct after you read them, remote wipe features if the police ever got hold of your device, and anonymous SIM cards that couldn't be traced back to you. At its peak, EncroChat had about 60,000 subscribers across Europe. 60,000 people, drug dealers, money launderers, hitmen, gun runners, all chatting away, thinking they were completely safe from the police. And for a while, they were right. The police couldn't crack it. EncroChat advertised itself as impenetrable, and criminals believed it. Michael McNally certainly did. He created an account under the username LankyPanda, probably a reference to his tall build and calm personality, and got to work building his empire. Every day, McNally would log onto his EncroChat device and message other users with handles like Juicy Wild and Happy Tiger. They'd discuss prices, delivery times, and how to manage risks. He'd arrange for kilos of cocaine and heroin to be picked up from wholesalers, brought to his locations, cut and repackaged, then distributed to dealers across the country. He used a white Renault Kangoo van with a registration ending in 66 to move the drugs around. He changed locations frequently. He thought he was being clever, but what McNally didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the game had already changed. Let me ask you something. Have you ever sent a message you regret? Maybe you were venting about your boss, or gossiping about a friend, and then suddenly realized, what if someone sees this? Now imagine that feeling, but multiply it by 1,000. Because while McNally and his 60,000 criminal mates were chatting away on EncroChat, thinking they were safe, French and Dutch investigators had already cracked the whole system wide open. In 2019, cyber experts from France and the Netherlands managed to breach EncroChat's servers. And I don't mean they could see encrypted messages after the fact. No, they went one better. They installed what they called a technical tool that copied every single message before it even got encrypted. Think about that for a second. Every deal discussed, every threat made, every photo shared, all of it captured in plain text and sent straight to law enforcement. By early 2020, millions of messages were being copied and shared with police forces across Europe. In the UK, this intelligence fed into something called Operation Venetic, a massive investigation led by the National Crime Agency and regional police forces. And the results? Absolutely devastating for organised crime. Let me give you some numbers from Merseyside alone, where McNally operated. Over 5 years, Operation Venetic led to 213 people being charged with serious offences. 180 of them have been sentenced to a combined total of 2,261 years in prison. Police seized £2 million in cash and more than 150 kilograms of Class A drugs. Firearms, ammunition, money laundering operations, all exposed and shut down. But here's what makes this investigation so fascinating. The way police identified these criminals wasn't just through reading their drug deals and threats. It was through the tiny, stupid mistakes they made. The kind of mistakes you or I might make without thinking. One dealer was identified because he shared a photo of his back garden, and investigators noticed a distinctive palm tree that matched satellite images of a specific property. Another was caught because he posted pictures of his prize racing pigeons, and it turned out he was a registered member of a pigeon racing club. Someone else was tracked down because they sent a photo of a block of cheese and left their fingerprints visible on the wrapper. These criminals thought they were untouchable. They thought encryption meant invincibility, but they forgot the most important rule. Human error always finds a way, and that brings us back to Michael McNally, standing in his garden in Bootle, watching police deal with a car crash outside his house. It's a normal spring day in 2020. McNally's at home on Southport Road. He hears a commotion outside and looks out to see police officers responding to a traffic collision right near his property. He finds it amusing. All these coppers running around, probably thinking they're important. So he grabs his EncroChat phone, takes a few pictures of the scene, and sends them to his contacts with a message. "Heavy Ken Dodd out here," he writes. Now, if you're not familiar with rhyming slang, Ken Dodd rhymes with plod, which is British slang for police. So he's basically saying, loads of police outside my house. Just a casual observation, right? A bit of banter with the lads. Except those photos contained something McNally didn't think about. Metadata, location data. But more importantly, they clearly showed the front of his house, and parked in his garden, a white Renault Kangoo van. Now remember, in his EncroChat messages, McNally had already told people he was using a white Kangoo van on a 66 plate for his deliveries. So now investigators have photos of his house, showing that exact van, sent from his EncroChat device. But they still need to connect LankyPanda to a real person. Here's where good old-fashioned police work comes in. Investigators took those crash photos and started cross-referencing them with instant logs from Merseyside police. They wanted to find out if there really was a traffic collision reported in that area at that time. And guess what? There was. The logs showed a collision on Southport Road in Bootle on the exact date McNally sent those photos. But they didn't stop there. Officers from the Merseyside Organised Crime Partnership, a joint team between the National Crime Agency and local police, decided to do a discreet drive-by of the address. They cruised past the house on Southport Road, keeping it low-key, just taking a look, and there it was, the same white Renault Kangoo van, parked in the garden, exactly where it appeared in the EncroChat photos. At that moment, the puzzle was complete. LankyPanda wasn't just some anonymous username anymore. He was Michael McNally, 42 years old, living on Southport Road in Bootle, and he had no idea what was coming. So, what do you think happened next? Do you reckon McNally got a gentle knock on the door and a polite request to come down the station? Not quite. On the 13th of May, 2025, officers from the Organised Crime Partnership, backed up by the Merseyside Police Matrix Disruption Team, launched a raid on McNally's home. These aren't your average bobbies on the beat. The Matrix team deals with serious organised crime. Gangs, guns, violence. They're the ones who kick doors down when things get serious. And serious it was. When officers searched the house, They found a handgun hidden in the loft, not a replica, not a deactivated weapon, a viable firearm with ammunition. They also seized around £35,000 in cash. During wider searches of locations connected to McNally, they discovered more: a semi-automatic pistol and additional cash stashed in various hiding spots. Michael McNally was arrested on the spot. He was charged with conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, specifically cocaine and heroin, conspiracy to supply Class B drugs, cannabis, money laundering offenses, possession of a firearm and ammunition. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The EncroChat messages, the photos he'd sent, the physical items seized from his property, the financial records showing £18.5 million moving through his operation. He appeared at Liverpool Magistrates Court and was remanded to appear at Liverpool Crown Court. And here's the thing, when you're facing evidence like that, evidence that shows exactly what you said, when you said it, and who you said it to, there's not much point in denying it. On the 17th of June 2025, Michael McNally stood in Liverpool Crown Court and admitted to everything. Multiple offences, the whole lot. The judge acknowledged the massive scale of his drug operation, the sophistication of his money laundering, and the serious danger posed by the firearms. McNally was sentenced to 17 years in prison. 17 years. That's a long time to think about a few photos you took on a random Tuesday afternoon. But here's what I want you to understand. McNally's downfall isn't just about one man making one mistake. It's about a fundamental shift in how law enforcement tackles organized crime. For years, criminals stayed ahead of the police by using better technology: encrypted phones, anonymous messaging, sophisticated logistics. They thought they were playing a game the police couldn't win. Operation Venetic proved them wrong. It showed that no matter how advanced the technology, human behavior will always be the weak point. Criminals can't help themselves. They share photos of their houses, their cars, their hobbies. They boast about their operations. They make jokes and use slang that gives away their location or identity. And all of that becomes evidence. Detective Chief Superintendent Karen Jondrell, who worked on Operation Venetic, put it perfectly. She said criminals on EncroChat thought they were operating under the radar, but investigators could read every single message. She talked about how police evidenced where drug dealers lived from images they proudly shared of their homes and gardens. She emphasized that the work continues, identifying more offenders and seizing the proceeds of their crimes. And she made another crucial point. These criminals rely on threats, intimidation, and violence. They terrorize communities. They fuel addiction. They destroy families. And law enforcement is relentless in pursuing anyone who supplies drugs. So what's the aftermath of all this? Well, for Merseyside, removing a supplier like McNally means less cocaine and heroin flooding the streets. It disrupts the entire supply chain. Dealers who relied on him for their stock suddenly have no source. Users who depend on those dealers face shortages. And the violence that comes with drug territory disputes, the stabbings, the shootings, the intimidation, that all reduces when major suppliers get taken out. But there's a bigger picture here too. Operation Venetic sent a message to every criminal in Europe who thought encrypted phones made them untouchable. It showed that law enforcement can infiltrate these systems. It proved that international cooperation works. French and Dutch cyber experts breaking the encryption, Europol sharing the intelligence, UK police building the cases. This is policing in the modern age. And for McNally himself, he's got 17 years to reflect on his choices. 17 years thinking about how an £18.5 million operation was brought down by a few photos of a car crash. 17 years, knowing that if he'd just kept his phone in his pocket that day, if he hadn't sent those pictures, he might still be out there, still running his empire. But that's the thing about crime. It's not just about being smart or having good technology. It's about never making mistakes, and humans always make mistakes. Let me leave you with this thought. Right now, somewhere in Britain, there's probably another criminal using another encrypted phone, thinking they're safe. They're messaging their associates, arranging deals, sharing photos, and somewhere else, there's a team of investigators reading every word, building a case, waiting for that one mistake that will bring the whole thing crashing down. Because that's what Operation Venetic taught us. No matter how careful you think you're being, no matter how advanced your technology is, one moment of carelessness is all it takes. One photo, one message, one tiny human error. Michael McNally learned that lesson the hard way, and now 212 other criminals from Merseyside have learned it too. If this story got you thinking, imagine what else is out there. The criminals who thought they were smarter than McNally, the investigations that are happening right now, the cases that haven't been solved yet. We'll be covering all of it, diving deep into the UK's most shocking crime stories, showing you how these criminals operate and how they eventually fall. So hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Turn on notifications so you don't miss a single video. Drop a comment and let me know. What do you think about EncroChat? Should criminals get lighter sentences if they cooperate? Do you think encryption should even be allowed? I read every comment and I love hearing what you think. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. A 3-month-old baby, a desperate emergency call, and a truth so dark it would shock an entire nation. On a cold November morning in 2024, paramedics raced through the streets of Seacombe on the Wirral Peninsula, just across the River Mersey from Liverpool. Inside a modest terraced house on Percy Road, a tiny baby lay lifeless. His name was Miguel Pirjani. He was only 3 months old. By the time emergency services arrived, his small body was already growing cold. What they would discover in the following hours would reveal one of the most heartbreaking cases of child cruelty that the courts of Liverpool had seen in years. But here's what makes this story even more devastating. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't an accident. And the people responsible for protecting this innocent child were the very ones who caused his death. Before we go any further, if you appreciate the work that goes into bringing you these detailed true crime investigations, please take just a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These stories matter. They honor the victims and they remind us all why we must stay vigilant. Your support helps us continue this important work. Now, let's continue with Miguel's story. Miguel's life began on the 27th of August, 2024. From his very first breath, this little boy faced challenges that most of us can hardly imagine. He was born prematurely, which means he arrived into this world earlier than expected, and his tiny body wasn't quite ready for life outside the womb. Because of complications related to his premature birth, Miguel spent the first 6 weeks of his life in hospital. Think about that for a moment. 6 weeks is almost half of his entire life. While most newborns go home within a day or two, Miguel needed round-the-clock medical care just to survive. The doctors and nurses at the hospital worked tirelessly to help this fragile infant grow stronger. They monitored his breathing, made sure he could feed properly, and watched carefully for any signs of trouble. Medical staff later testified that Miguel responded well to treatment. Despite his difficult start, he was a fighter. He was growing. He was getting stronger. Finally, after those long 6 weeks, the medical team felt confident enough to send Miguel home with his parents. It should have been a moment of joy and relief, a new beginning for a family, but instead, it marked the start of a nightmare that would end in tragedy. Miguel's parents were Clevi Pirjani and Nivalda Santos Pirjani. Clevi, who was in his mid-30s, had come from Albania. His wife Nivalda, who was in her early 30s, was originally from Brazil. The couple had met online back in 2014, which was becoming increasingly common in our connected world. They had started their relationship in the digital space, exchanged messages across continents, and eventually decided to build a life together. By 2016, Nivalda had moved in with Clevi at his home on Percy Road in Seacombe. Now, let me paint a picture of where this family lived, because understanding the setting helps us understand the story. Seacombe is a working-class district on the Wirral Peninsula. If you're not familiar with British geography, imagine standing in Liverpool and looking across the River Mersey. On the other side, you'll see the Wirral. It's a peninsula bounded by water on 3 sides, with the River Mersey to the east, the Irish Sea to the north, and the River Dee to the west. Seacombe sits right on the eastern waterfront, directly facing Liverpool across the water. This is an area with a proud industrial heritage, but also significant economic challenges. Many of the traditional industries that once provided employment have long since closed. The streets are lined with terraced houses, those distinctively British rows of attached homes that share walls with their neighbours. Percy Road is one of these streets. It's the kind of neighbourhood where people know each other, where children play on the pavements, and where news travels fast. The Piani family kept largely to themselves, though. Neighbours would later tell police that they seemed quiet and private. Clevy worked as a chef and also as a digger operator, which meant he operated heavy machinery on construction sites. These were honest, hard-working jobs. Nivalda stayed home to care for their newborn son. From the outside, they appeared to be just another young family trying to make ends meet and build a future together. There was no known history with social services. No red flags had been raised. No warnings had been issued. As far as anyone knew, this was simply a family welcoming their first child into the world. But behind closed doors, something terrible was happening. And here's where the story takes a turn that will make you question everything you think you know about this case. When Miguel finally came home from hospital in early October 2024, he required careful attention. Premature babies often need special feeding schedules, gentle handling, and close monitoring. The medical team had sent him home with detailed instructions for his parents. Follow-up appointments had been scheduled. Everything seemed to be in place for Miguel to continue thriving in the comfort of his own home. Yet, according to testimony that would later emerge in court, trouble began almost immediately. Nivalda would tell a jury that just 2 days after Miguel came home from hospital, her partner Clevy became angry during a feeding. She claimed that when the baby struggled to eat or took too long to feed, Clevy would lose his temper. She described instances where, she alleged, Clevy held the baby by the hips and banged him repeatedly on the bed. She said she witnessed him kicking the infant. These are allegations that Clevy vehemently denied, and we must remember that in the British justice system, both sides get to present their version of events. But here's what we know for certain. Medical experts would later examine Miguel's tiny body and discover something absolutely horrifying. This 3-month-old baby had suffered at least 41 fractures. Let me repeat that number because it's so shocking it's hard to comprehend. 41 fractures. In a baby who hadn't even lived for 100 days. These weren't injuries from a single incident. Forensic pathologists who specialize in examining suspicious injuries in children performed detailed scans and surveys of Miguel's skeleton. They found fractures of different ages. Some were fresh and new. Others were older and had already begun to heal. This is crucial evidence because it tells us something deeply disturbing. It means the injuries happened over time. It means there were multiple instances of violence against this helpless infant. Miguel had fractures to his collarbone. He had fractures to his upper arm. He had fractures to his shin. He had displaced skull bones, which means parts of his skull had been moved out of their normal position by force. He had bleeding around his cervical cord, which is the bundle of nerves that runs through the spine in the neck area. He had retinal hemorrhages, which are bleeds in the back of the eye that often indicate violent shaking or impact. And he had brain swelling and bleeding. Now, you might be wondering how doctors could tell these injuries weren't accidental. After all, couldn't a baby suffer fractures from a fall or from rough play? This is where medical expertise becomes absolutely critical to understanding what happened. Pediatric specialists, doctors who focus specifically on treating children, explained to the court that the pattern of injuries was completely inconsistent with normal handling or even with accidental trauma. When a baby falls from a changing table or a bed, for example, the injuries tend to be localized to the area that hit the ground. You might see a skull fracture at the impact site, but you wouldn't see 41 different fractures throughout the body. When caregivers accidentally drop a baby or handle them too roughly during a moment of stress, you don't see fractures of multiple different ages showing a pattern of repeated harm over time. The medical evidence was clear and undeniable. Someone had deliberately hurt this baby. Someone had used significant force against an infant who couldn't defend himself, couldn't run away, and couldn't even speak to tell anyone what was happening to him, and that someone had done it not just once, but multiple times over a period of weeks. But here's the question that would become central to this entire case. Who exactly was responsible? Was it the father, as the mother claimed? Was it the mother, as the father would later suggest? Or were both parents involved in harming their own child? This is where British law has a particularly interesting provision that many people don't know about. There's a specific criminal offence called causing or allowing the death of a child. This law was created back in 2005 specifically to address cases like this one. Let me explain why this law exists, because it tells us something important about how justice works when the only witnesses to a crime are the perpetrators themselves. Imagine a scenario where a child dies in a household with two adults. The medical evidence proves beyond doubt that the child was murdered. But there's a problem. It's impossible to determine which adult actually committed the fatal act. Traditional murder charges require prosecutors to prove that a specific person committed the crime. If both adults remain silent or blame each other, and there are no witnesses or conclusive evidence showing who did what, both could potentially escape justice. The causing or allowing law closes this loophole. It says that if you're a household member with frequent contact with a child, and that child dies from an unlawful act, you can be held criminally responsible in one of two ways. Either you caused the death directly, or you were aware of a significant risk of serious harm to the child and failed to take reasonable steps to protect them. The brilliant part of this law is that prosecutors don't have to prove which of these two alternatives applies. They just have to prove that one of them does. This means both parents can be convicted even if we can't determine exactly which one struck the fatal blow, because both had a duty to protect their child. Both lived in that house. Both had opportunities to seek help, to call for medical attention, to report abuse, or to remove the child from danger. The law recognizes that failing to protect a child from harm you know about is itself serious crime. Let's return to the morning of Sunday, the 24th of November, 2024. This is when everything came to a head. Shortly before noon, Clevi Piriani made a call to 999, which is the British emergency number. When you listen to descriptions of emergency calls in cases like this, the details can be chilling. The operator who took the call would later note certain things about how Clevi spoke and what he said. He reported that his baby had stopped breathing, but here's something that stood out. He referred to Miguel using the word it rather than he or my son. He said, and I'm paraphrasing the court reports here, that it had just stopped breathing. Now, in fairness, English was not Clevi's first language. He spoke Albanian natively. Under extreme stress, non-native speakers sometimes struggle to find the right words, so we shouldn't read too much into a single word choice. But prosecutors would later point to this as evidence of detachment and lack of normal parental emotion. The other detail that raised eyebrows was how calm Clevi sounded during the call. Most parents calling emergency services about an unresponsive baby are hysterical. They're screaming, crying, begging for help. The sheer terror in their voices is unmistakable, but operators noted that Clevi's demeanor seemed unusually composed for someone whose infant child had just stopped breathing. Again, people react to trauma in different ways, and cultural factors can influence how emotions are expressed, but it was noted nonetheless. When asked what had happened, Clevi told the operator that he had been trying to feed the baby when Miguel stopped breathing. He made no mention of any injury or accident. He didn't say the baby had fallen or that anything unusual had occurred. When asked about the baby's mother, he said she was sleeping. The operator told him to begin rescue breathing while paramedics were dispatched. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Seacombe is well served by emergency services, despite being across the river from Liverpool. Paramedics rushed into the house and found Miguel in cardiac arrest. This means his heart had stopped beating. For an infant, this is an extremely critical situation. Every second matters when the heart isn't pumping blood to the brain and vital organs. The paramedics immediately began advanced life support. They worked quickly and professionally, doing everything possible to restart this baby's heart. And remarkably, they succeeded. Miguel's heartbeat was restored, but he remained unconscious and unresponsive. His tiny body was pale. Witnesses described visible bruising on his head. There was no sign of accidental trauma, like you might see if a child had tumbled downstairs or fallen from a significant height. Miguel was rushed to Alder Hey Children's Hospital. Now, for those unfamiliar with the British healthcare system, Alder Hey is one of the crown jewels of the National Health Service. It's located in West Derby in Liverpool, about 6 or 7 miles from Seacombe. To get there from Seacombe, ambulances typically use the Mersey tunnels, which run under the river connecting the Wirral to Liverpool. The journey takes roughly 20 to 30 minutes depending on traffic. Alder Hey is not just any children's hospital. It's one of the largest and busiest specialist pediatric hospitals in all of Europe. International publications have ranked it among the top 20 specialist children's hospitals in the entire world. It treats more than 450,000 children every year. It has some of the most advanced medical equipment and the most skilled pediatric specialists you'll find anywhere. If any hospital could save Miguel, it would be Alder Hey. The doctors in the intensive care unit worked around the clock. They perform CT scans, which use X-rays to create detailed images of the inside of the body. They conducted skeletal surveys, which are comprehensive X-ray examinations of every bone. What they discovered left them stunned and heartbroken. The full extent of Miguel's injuries became clear. The multiple fractures, the skull damage, the brain bleeding, the retinal hemorrhages. Medical staff also observed something troubling about the parents' behavior at the hospital. Court reports later indicated that hospital workers watched Clevy and Nivalda whispering to each other. Rather than focusing all their attention on their dying child, they seemed preoccupied with what the police might know or what evidence might exist. Now, we must be careful here. People under extreme stress sometimes behave in ways that seem inappropriate, but are actually just manifestations of shock or fear. But the observations were documented and would later be presented as evidence. For 5 agonizing days, Miguel clung to life on a ventilator. A ventilator is a machine that breathes for someone who can't breathe on their own. But the medical team knew that Miguel's injuries were catastrophic. His brain had been deprived of oxygen for too long, a condition called hypoxic ischemic brain injury. The swelling and bleeding in his brain were severe. Despite the heroic efforts of some of the best pediatric doctors in Europe, there was nothing more that could be done. On Friday the 29th of November, 2024, the heartbreaking decision was made to withdraw life support. This is never done lightly. Multiple specialists must agree that continuing treatment would serve no medical purpose and would only prolong suffering. Nivalda was reportedly at Miguel's bedside as life support was withdrawn. She held his tiny hand. According to witnesses, she said through tears, "I should have protected you." Those words would echo through the courtroom months later. They suggested knowledge. They suggested guilt. They suggested that she knew Miguel was in danger and failed to act. Minutes after life support was removed, Miguel died. He was 3 months and 2 days old. He had spent nearly half his short life in hospital. He had come home to what should have been safety and love. Instead, he encountered violence and ultimately death. Both parents were arrested shortly after Miguel died. Initially, they were charged with causing grievous bodily harm and wounding with intent under Section 18 of the Offences Against the Person Act. These are serious assault charges, but they're not murder charges. Once the post-mortem examination confirmed that Miguel's death was caused by deliberate violence, the charges were upgraded. On the 21st of January, 2025, both Clevy and Nivalda were formally charged with murder, causing or allowing the death of a child, and causing grievous bodily harm with intent. The investigation was led by Detective Inspector Holly Chance of Merseyside Police. Detective Inspector Chance would later describe the case as truly shocking. She emphasized that Miguel was killed by his own parents, the very people who were meant to nurture him and protect him from harm. Investigators worked meticulously. They secured the family home and collected forensic evidence. They gathered bedding, clothing, and feeding bottles. Digital forensics teams analyzed the parents' mobile phones, looking for messages, searches, or any other evidence. One text message became a point of controversy during the trial. Before making the emergency call on the 24th of November, Clevy had sent a message to Nivalda using an Albanian word. The prosecution claimed this word, which was rendered as bishi in English letters, meant monster or beast. They argued that Clevy was calling his own baby a monster, which showed a disturbing attitude toward the child. The defense countered that the word actually meant hero in Albanian, suggesting affection rather than contempt. No linguistic expert was called to definitively resolve this dispute. The jury was left to decide what they believed about the meaning and significance of that single word. Over the following months, the case progressed through the court system. Both parents appeared at hearings via video link from custody. The court refused bail applications, citing the severity of the charges and concerns about public safety. Throughout this time, the prosecution and defense teams prepared their cases. Medical experts refined their reports. Witness statements were taken. The machinery of British justice slowly but surely moved toward trial. The trial began on Monday, the 6th of October, 2025, at Liverpool Crown Court. Liverpool Crown Court is an imposing building that has seen countless dramatic trials over its history. For 3 weeks, 12 jurors listened to testimony, examined evidence, and tried to piece together what had really happened in that house on Percy Road. Nivalda took the witness stand and painted a picture of herself as a victim of domestic abuse. She told the jury that Clevy had been violent toward her since they moved in together back in 2016. She described him as controlling and frightening. She said that after Miguel came home from hospital, Clevy would become enraged if the baby struggled to feed. She claimed she witnessed him banging Miguel on the bed and kicking the infant. When asked why she didn't report this to anyone, she said she was terrified of her partner. She testified that he prevented her from leaving or seeking help. Clevy, for his part, denied ever harming his son. When he took the stand, he described himself as the best dad in the world. He said he had looked forward to fatherhood and loved Miguel deeply. When confronted with the medical evidence of extensive injuries, he suggested that some fractures might have been caused by the paramedics performing chest compressions during resuscitation efforts. Medical experts firmly rejected this explanation. They testified that chest compressions can sometimes cause rib fractures in adults, but they don't cause fractures to the skull, arms, legs, and collarbone. They certainly don't cause fractures of multiple different ages, showing repeated trauma over time. When pressed about who could have caused the injuries if not him, Clevy sometimes implied that Nivalda might be responsible. The defense strategy seemed to be to create doubt about which parent was the actual perpetrator. But remember that law we discussed earlier about causing or allowing the death of a child. Even if the jury couldn't determine which parent struck the blows, both could still be convicted if they failed to protect Miguel from harm they knew about. The prosecution, led by Peter Wright, who is a King's Counsel, which means he's a senior and highly respected barrister, argued that both parents had systematically abused Miguel over a period of weeks. The medical evidence of injuries at different stages of healing supported a pattern of repeated violence, rather than a single incident. The prosecution emphasized that whether one parent was the primary abuser or both participated equally, both had a duty to protect their helpless child. Both had opportunities to seek medical help, to call social services, to tell a health visitor, or to take Miguel back to hospital. Neither did. The jury deliberated carefully. On Wednesday, the 29th of October, 2025, they returned their verdict, guilty. Both Clevy Pirjani and Nivalda Santos Pirjani were found guilty of murder, causing or allowing the death of a child, and causing grievous bodily harm with intent. When the verdicts were announced, both parents wept in the dock. The dock is the enclosed area in a British courtroom where defendants sit during trial. The judge remanded them both into custody pending sentencing, which is scheduled for early 2026. Under British law, murder carries a mandatory life sentence. That means there's no discretion. If you're convicted of murder, you receive a life sentence. What varies is the minimum term you must serve before being eligible to apply for parole. The causing or allowing the death of a child offence also now carries a maximum of life imprisonment after the law was strengthened in recent years. Detective Inspector Holly Chance issued a statement after the verdicts thanking the medical teams who tried to save Miguel and the investigators who built the case. She said that Miguel was only 3 months old when his life was tragically cut short at the violent hands of his parents. Those words capture the essential tragedy of this case. The people who should have protected Miguel were the ones who killed him. The community of Seacombe was deeply shaken by the news. After the verdict, people left flowers and teddy bears near the family home on Percy Road. Many expressed disbelief that such horror could occur in their neighborhood. But the sad reality is that child abuse happens everywhere. It crosses all socio-economic lines, all ethnicities, all religions, and all geographic boundaries. It happens in wealthy suburbs and in struggling inner cities. It happens in sprawling mansions and in modest terraced houses. So, what can we learn from Miguel's tragic story? What lessons should we take away from this heartbreaking case? First, we must recognize that premature babies and infants with medical complications are particularly vulnerable. Miguel spent his first 6 weeks in hospital because his tiny body needed extra support. Parents caring for medically complex infants face enormous stress. The baby may have difficulty feeding, sleep schedules are disrupted, medical appointments pile up, money is tight, emotions run high. None of this excuses violence, but it reminds us that new parents, especially those dealing with health challenges, need support. Second, we must be vigilant. Health visitors, family members, neighbors, and community members all have a role to play in safeguarding children. If you notice unexplained injuries on a child, if a baby seems unusually fussy or withdrawn, if parents seem overwhelmed or hostile, it's worth making a discreet inquiry. In the UK, anyone concerned about a child's welfare can contact the NSPCC helpline or local social services. You don't need proof of abuse, you just need a reasonable concern. Third, we must understand that abuse often happens behind closed doors in families that seem ordinary from the outside. The Pirjanese had no known history with social services. Neighbors thought they were just a quiet family, but inside that house a baby was suffering. We cannot assume that everything is fine just because a family looks normal. Fourth, we must recognize the importance of forensic medicine in cases like this. Without the skilled work of pediatric specialists and forensic pathologists, it would have been impossible to prove that Miguel's injuries were deliberate rather than accidental. These medical professionals provide the voice that children like Miguel cannot provide themselves. They study the evidence written on tiny bodies and translate it into testimony that juries can understand. Finally, we must remember Miguel himself, not just as a victim, not just as a tragic story, but as a real child who deserved so much more than he received. He was a fighter from the very beginning, surviving premature birth and spending 6 weeks in hospital getting stronger. He had his whole life ahead of him. He should be learning to smile right now, reaching for toys, recognizing his parents' faces. Instead, his life was cut short by violence in the place where he should have been safest. If you've watched this video all the way to the end, thank you for taking the time to hear Miguel's story. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this with others. These stories matter. They keep us aware. They remind us to be vigilant, and they honor the memory of innocent victims who can no longer speak for themselves. If you know someone who is struggling as a new parent, reach out to them. Offer practical help. Watch for signs of stress or violence. If you work with families or children professionally, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't be afraid to ask difficult questions or make reports to authorities. You might just save a life. Miguel Pirjani should still be here. He should be 6 months old now, sitting up, laughing, exploring the world. The fact that he isn't is a tragedy that shakes us to our core. But his story can still serve a purpose. It can wake us up. It can make us more aware. It can inspire us to protect the vulnerable children in our own communities. Thank you for watching. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, if you ever suspect a child is being harmed, speak up. Make that call. You might be the only voice that child has. In today's video, we cover a gang from Liverpool that helped to poison the Rice Lane area and the surrounding communities with the supply of drugs and guns. A Scorpion submachine gun doesn't look particularly menacing at first glance. It's compact, almost toy-like in its proportions, small enough to fit inside a rucksack alongside a few changes of clothes or a pair of trainers. But what it lacks in size, it more than compensates for in lethality. The weapon fires 9mm rounds at a rate of several hundred per minute, and when it's pointed at your home or your body, the difference between a submachine gun and something larger becomes entirely academic. In the spring of 2022, this particular Scorpion was used twice within the space of a week to spray bullets across residential streets in Liverpool. Then it vanished, swallowed up by the city's criminal underworld, tucked away in a safe house where it could wait, loaded and ready for the next time someone needed it. What makes this story particularly unsettling isn't just the violence itself, but the casual infrastructure that surrounded it. The gun didn't disappear into some high-security vault or the home of a criminal mastermind. Instead, it ended up wrapped in a tea towel, stuffed inside a black Under Armour rucksack, hidden in the bathroom of a flat in Walton, controlled by a drug user named Anthony Bosanquet. The DNA of two other men, both of them users who had purchased drugs from the same supply line, was later found on the weapon. These weren't hardened gangsters in the traditional sense. They were people caught up in the gravitational pull of the Rice Lane drug dealing operation, a network that moved heroin and cocaine through the streets of North Liverpool, whilst simultaneously serving as the custodians of deadly weapons. And at the centre of it all was Scott Howard, a 35-year-old man who had become, in the words of the prosecution, the head of the Rice Lane drug-dealing fraternity. The first shooting happened in April 2022 on Deverell Grove in Wavertree. The victim was a woman in her 50s named Beverly Tynan, who was shot in the leg. The circumstances surrounding the attack remain opaque, as they so often do in cases like these, but what is known is that her son, Charlie Tynan, was subsequently convicted of offences relating to his involvement in the supply of Class A drugs. Whether the shooting was a warning, an act of revenge, or something else entirely, the outcome was the same. A woman was injured, a family was torn apart, and the Scorpion submachine gun that had caused the damage simply moved on to its next target. That target came roughly a week later, on the beach walk in Stonycroft. This time, the gun was fired through the front window of a house belonging to Jason Hughes, who was also later convicted of being involved in the production and supply of cannabis. Again, the motivations remain unclear. What's evident, though, is the pattern. The weapon was being used to settle scores, to send messages, to enforce the unspoken rules of a criminal economy that operates parallel to the legitimate one. And after each use, it had to be hidden away, kept safe and ready for the next time it was needed. Enter Anthony Bosanquet, known to his associates as Boz. He was a customer of the Wong Line, one of the two drug supply chains that Howard and his partner, Anthony Nelson, operated out of the Rice Lane area. The lines, whimsically named Wong and Won Chin, had been active since at least the end of 2022, supplying heroin and cocaine to users across North Liverpool. Bosanquet's role in the operation wasn't that of a dealer or a lieutenant. He was a user, someone lower down the food chain. But he had something that made him valuable. He had access to a flat on Grey Road in Walton, a place that could serve as a safe house. And on the 2nd of March, 2023, when Merseyside police raided that flat, they found the Scorpion wrapped in its tea towel, nestled inside the Under Armour rucksack in the bathroom. Alongside it were a silencer and loaded magazines. Bosanquet, who had been previously jailed for 5.5 years after pleading guilty to possession of a firearm and possession of cannabis and cannabis resin with intent to supply, was back in custody. But the investigation was only just beginning. The DNA evidence recovered from the Scorpion told a story of its own. Two men, Gary Bell and Stephen Moore, had both left traces of themselves on the weapon. Bell, a 48-year-old from Northfield Road in Bootle, had 37 previous convictions for 74 offences. Moore, 53 and of no fixed address, had an even longer record with 47 convictions for 90 offences. Both men were drug users, both had purchased from the Wong Line, and both had, at some point, handled the submachine gun. The prosecution's case was straightforward. They had been involved in either the storage or the movement of the weapon before it was recovered. They were useful, trusted even, in the way that people who are dependent on drugs can be useful to those who supply them. They had access to places, to people, to networks that might otherwise be closed off. And so, when the Scorpion needed to be moved or hidden, They were enlisted to help. But the story doesn't end with the Scorpion. If anything, that was just the beginning. On the evening of the 19th of April, 2023, Scott Howard was spotted in woodland near Rice Lane Recreation Ground in the company of another man. A police helicopter was deployed and officers traced their movements towards the Liverpool Loop Line. The second man managed to escape on an electric bicycle, disappearing into the urban sprawl. But Howard was arrested on foot. He was carrying a pair of gloves and a balaclava, items that suggested he wasn't out for an evening stroll. When officers searched the woods, they found an abandoned bike and a rucksack containing a canister of petrol. Hidden in a nearby bush was another gun, a Zoraki 917 blank-firing handgun that had been converted to discharge 9mm caliber ammunition. A silencer had been fitted to this weapon as well, transforming it from a relatively harmless starting pistol into something far more dangerous. Howard's criminal history stretched back years. He had 18 previous convictions for 29 offenses, including a 2-year sentence for possession of heroin and cannabis with intent to supply back in 2007. But it wasn't just drug dealing that occupied his time. In 2021, whilst serving a prison sentence, he had become embroiled in a scheme to smuggle contraband into HMP Liverpool using drones. The operation was uncovered on the 20th of December that year, when guards noticed a drone flying near the prison. When the device was seized, it was found to have made 3 previous flights into Walton Prison. Attached to it was a package containing 62 grams of cannabis, which had a street value of between £350 and £500 on the outside, but was worth between £3,100 and £4,650 inside the prison. Quantities of tobacco, worth £20 to £50 outside, skyrocketed in value to between £2,800 and £3,150 once inside. A mobile phone attached to the drone contained records of a total of 31 flights into the establishment. A second drone recovered during the investigation had made 6 trips into HMP Liverpool from November 2021 onwards. In total, the conspiracy was estimated to have been responsible for contraband worth between £236,000 and £312,000 flown into the jail over an 8-month period. It was an audacious scheme, one that spoke to Howard's ambition and his willingness to exploit any opportunity for profit, even from inside a prison cell. But ambition, in this context, is a double-edged sword. The same drive that enabled Howard to run a profitable drug supply operation and orchestrate a drone smuggling conspiracy also made him reckless. By the time he was arrested in the woods near Rice Lane Recreation Ground, he was already on bail for other offences, and yet there he was, in possession of gloves, a balaclava, and within arm's reach of a loaded, silenced handgun. It was the kind of behaviour that suggests either desperation or a profound inability to learn from past mistakes. The other members of the Rice Lane operation were a mixed group, united not by any grand criminal vision, but by circumstance, addiction, and the lure of easy money. Terry Riley, 34, of Glan Aber Park in West Derby, had 20 previous court appearances for 45 offences, though none since 2017. He had spent years in a steady relationship, working as a chef in a public house and trying to stay on the straight and narrow. But when the pub closed down and he was laid off, the temptation of earning a dishonest income proved too strong. He became a lieutenant in the Wong Line operation, trusted to manage and control the graft phone on behalf of Howard and Nelson. It was his first stint in adult detention, and it came at a cost. His relationship with his partner didn't survive his incarceration, though he maintained contact with his 7-year-old son, a relationship to which he attached great significance. Liam Duffy, 28, of Radmore Road in Knotty Ash, had an even more extensive record, 8 convictions for 18 offences, including possession of heroin and cocaine with intent to supply in 2014, possession of heroin and crack cocaine with intent to supply in 2016, and conspiracy to supply heroin and cocaine in 2018. He had 3 children with his partner, who worked as a care assistant for elderly people and young children. The children had neurodiversity issues, and Duffy had looked after them well when he was around. He had even run a gardening business for a time. But when it collapsed, he fell back into old habits, returning to the drug trade with an ease that spoke to how deeply ingrained those patterns had become. By the time of his sentencing, he had spent approximately 7 years of his life in custody. He was still only 28. Gary Bell and Stephen Moore, the two men whose DNA was found on the Scorpion, were in many ways the most tragic figures in the entire operation. Bell was a vulnerable man with a long-standing addiction to controlled drugs. The prosecution couldn't say how long the prohibited weapon had been in his possession, and the evidence suggested that the firearm had been taken to his address by a third person. He wasn't in the best of health, and during his time in custody, his partner had died, causing him immense grief. To his credit, he had managed to rid himself of his addiction and intended to put his offending behind him. Though whether that intention would survive the years ahead remained to be seen. Moore's situation was similarly bleak. He was homeless at the time of his involvement with the Scorpion, and it was never entirely clear when or how he had come into contact with the gun. What was clear was that his contact with it had been brief, perhaps only a single day. He had a difficult time in custody, and because he had pleaded guilty, rumors or accusations had made his life inside even harder. Both of his parents were deceased, and his desire was to move out of Liverpool entirely, to escape the city that had brought him nothing but misery. Like Bell, he was now off the drugs that had consumed so much of his life, but the future remained uncertain. At the top of the conspiracy, or at least at the top of the particular branch that Howard and Nelson controlled, was a man named Terence Clark. Clark had used the EncroChat handle Sacred Truck before the encrypted communications platform was infiltrated by French police in 2020. Even after that infiltration, he continued his criminality, operating as the upstream supplier for the Wong and Wan Chin graph lines. He was involved in the supply of controlled drugs within Liverpool at a high level, moving very large amounts of Class A drugs through the city. The overall conspiracy he was involved in was sophisticated and had been running for years, with Howard and Nelson operating as one of several sub-branches. When the case finally came before Liverpool Crown Court, the defendants appeared in various states of resignation and defiance. Howard, wearing a black Givenchy jumper, was convicted of conspiracy to possess a prohibited firearm in relation to the Scorpion submachine gun. He had pleaded guilty to 2 counts of possession of a prohibited firearm, namely the Zoraki handgun and silencer, possession of ammunition without a certificate, conspiracy to supply heroin and cocaine, and 3 charges of conspiracy to convey prohibited articles into a prison. He was jailed for 21 years and 2 months. Duffy, wearing a grey Monterex tracksuit, stood with his arms folded as he was handed 8 years behind bars for conspiracy to supply heroin and cocaine. Riley, in a black North Face tracksuit top, nodded and gave a thumbs up to the judge as he was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment for the same offence. Moore, in a brown and yellow zip-up top, and Bell, in a navy blue castor coat, were locked up for 5 and 6 years, respectively, for conspiracy to possess a prohibited firearm. Judge David Swinnerton, in his sentencing remarks, was careful to distinguish between the various roles each defendant had played. He made it clear that none of them were being accused of involvement in the actual shootings that had taken place in April and May of 2022, but he also emphasized the seriousness of what they had done. The Scorpion had been used to cause harm, and after those shootings, it had to be stored somewhere. That's the purpose of safe houses, he explained, to store firearms, ammunition, or drugs at arm's length from those at the head of criminal operations. The flat on Grey Road was one such place, and Bell and Moore had been useful in the storage or movement of the gun before it was recovered. To Howard, the judge was particularly direct. You came to assist that group in looking after, hiding, keeping safe, keeping available, keeping out of the hands of the police, the Scorpion, he said. In doing that, you had the help of others around that Rice Lane drug-dealing fraternity. He also addressed Howard's conduct whilst on bail, his arrest in the woods near Rice Lane Recreation Ground, and the discovery of the second firearm. There cannot be many people in this city who are unaware of the potential effects of a Scorpion being fired, Judge Swinnerton continued. What you have been doing risks devastating other people's families, both because of the impacts of Class A drugs and the potential for devastation by having lethal firearms hidden, ready for use on the streets of Liverpool. Howard had written a letter to the court expressing remorse. His barrister, Jonathan Duffy, spoke of how the passage of time and separation from his family had caused him to realize the effect his actions had had on them and on his relationship with them. The family was close, with young children, one of whom had difficulties. Howard understood that he was going to be separated from his family for a further significant period, and he claimed that he never intended to offend again. His barrister argued that he hadn't been directly involved in selling or distributing wholesale quantities of Class A drugs, that he was managing street-level lines, not operating at the highest level. There was no evidence of a lavish lifestyle or significant amounts of cash. He was dealing and selling relatively modest quantities at street level, but Judge Swinnerton wasn't swayed. You are going to miss a substantial chunk of your children's childhoods, he told Howard. That is a great shame to them. You can still be a good father to them, or you go back to prison and waste your life. The case of the Rice Lane drug-dealing fraternity is, in many ways, an example of how organized crime functions in modern Britain. It's not the slick, glamorous world depicted in films, with criminal masterminds orchestrating complex heists from penthouse apartments. It's grim and transactional, built on addiction, exploitation, and the constant threat of violence. The people involved aren't masterminds. They're often vulnerable, sometimes desperate, and almost always trapped in cycles of behavior that are extraordinarily difficult to break. And yet, for all their vulnerabilities, they are still capable of facilitating extraordinary harm. A Scorpion submachine gun doesn't fire itself. Someone has to pull the trigger. And before that can happen, someone has to store it, move it, keep it ready. That's the role that Howard and his associates played, and it's a role that Judge Swinnerton made clear warranted serious punishment. Anthony Nelson, Howard's partner in running the Wong and Won Chin lines, admitted conspiracy to supply heroin and cocaine. The 28-year-old from Colquitt Street in Liverpool city centre was due to be sentenced the following Wednesday. His absence from the initial sentencing hearing was a reminder that cases like these are often sprawling affairs, involving multiple defendants, multiple hearings, and months or even years of legal wrangling. In the end, the story of the Rice Lane drug gang is a reminder of how deeply firearms have become embedded in Britain's drug economy. The Scorpion submachine gun, found in that Under Armour rucksack, wasn't an anomaly. It was part of a system, one that exists to protect profits, settle disputes, and enforce hierarchy. And as long as that system remains in place, the violence will continue. The names and faces may change, but the underlying dynamics remain the same. Someone will always need a safe house. Someone will always be willing to provide one. And somewhere, wrapped in a tea towel or hidden in a bush, another weapon will be waiting for the next time it's needed.
Give us your hands, mate, give us your hands. Give us your other one, I'll stick all your stuff, mate, in the bag. We'll bag it all up and come. So, again, just that's your property that you got left there, mate. Keep hold of that. Your money's going to go in the bag in front of you and be seized now.
In today's true crime documentary, we cover the downfall of a large-scale organised crime group led by a drug dealer who proudly called himself the Boss Man. This criminal enterprise, based primarily in the Sefton and Litherland areas of Merseyside, dealt in massive quantities of Class A and B drugs and, crucially, protected its trade using deadly submachine guns. The story of their collapse is a victory for Merseyside police, whose dedicated 15-month investigation ultimately led to the sentencing of 12 members of this organised crime group, or OCG. In total, these 12 criminals were jailed for more than 100 years, combined for firearms and drug offences. The police operation was highly effective, resulting in the seizure of 3 firearms, a quantity of ammunition, cash, and approximately £100,000 worth of cocaine. At the very top of this operation was Joshua Hayes, aged 34, who lived on Ryefield Lane in Litherland. Hayes was responsible for controlling a lucrative cocaine drug graft across Sefton. He was a man who saw himself as untouchable, styling himself as the boss man to his associates. Hayes's cocaine business was described as a large-scale street dealing operation. He supplied Class A drugs to a lot of different customers. The scale of this operation was staggering. Hayes himself was recorded discussing that he estimated he supplied about 250,000 kilograms of cocaine every 5 days. This drug line was active for massive stretches of time, running continuously between midday and 2 o'clock in the morning every day. Over the entire period investigated, which ran from January up to the 15th of July, the Crown estimated that Hayes's OCG was responsible for the supply of approximately 9 kilograms of cocaine. The financial value of this huge quantity was immense. The wholesale price was estimated to be between £252,000 and £324,000. When sold on the street, this same amount had a potential value ranging from £360,000 up to £900,000. Hayes even estimated that the specific phone he used to run his illegal trade was worth in the region of £200,000. Hayes did not stick around to micromanage every deal. He entrusted his crucial graft phone to key associates such as Aaron O'Brien, while he enjoyed holidays abroad in places like Turkey and Tenerife. However, the police were closer than Hayes realized. The entire OCG was ultimately brought down by a single piece of sophisticated surveillance. A secret bug, which police managed to plant inside his Mercedes car. This device provided detectives with material that proved essential to cracking the case. The most damning evidence came from a conversation recorded on June 21, 2024, involving Hayes, Anthony Bennett, James Harrison, and Georgie Medway. The men were captured discussing the firearms they possessed and how to hide them. Specifically, they talked about enlisting a plasterer to carry out work on a flat to ensure that the firearms were kept proper safe in a hole in the wall. This crucial intelligence led officers back to one of the flats they had previously searched unsuccessfully, the address of drug user Michael Caldwell on Condren Road North in Litherland. Detectives had searched 2 flats on this street on July 13th for firearms, but had initially failed to find them. But armed with the recording from the Mercedes, officers returned to Caldwell's address. They drilled through an area that had been newly plastered and redecorated. Hidden within a void in the walls, they discovered the deadly cache, 3 separate bags wrapped inside a tea towel. The firearms recovered were extremely serious weapons. They included 2 Czech-manufactured Scorpion submachine guns and 1 self-loading pistol, which was also identified as a Springfield pistol in one police report. Along with the automatic firearms, officers also recovered several expanding bullets, which are designed to explode upon hitting a surface, causing maximum damage. One of the Scorpions seized was confirmed through forensic investigation to have been used in a firearms discharge earlier in the year. This detail underscores the huge risk these criminals posed to public safety. Forensic evidence was vital in linking members of the OCG directly to these concealed weapons. Michael Caldwell's DNA was recovered from the trigger guard of one Scorpion and the rear hand grip of the other. Georgie Medway's DNA was also found on the latter Scorpion. Even teenager Thomas Ball's DNA was found on the first Scorpion and the self-loading pistol, connecting him directly to the cache. The investigation also provided insight into Hayes's volatile leadership and the internal pressure within the OCG. On June 12th, Hayes went on holiday to Tenerife, leaving Stephen Sutter and John Newton in charge of his drug operation. However, on June 20th, while being driven by Adam Dean in a Ford Focus on Altcar Road, Newton was arrested and found carrying £259 and 90p cash. Hayes returned to the UK in the early hours of that same day, and his reaction was immediately recorded by the bug in his Mercedes. He was furious, saying to Anthony Bennett, "The worker's been nicked with the phone, lad. I'm gonna smash them up, lad." Hayes ranted, saying he couldn't get hold of his workers and complained, "Effing joke this lad. Can't even go on holiday for a effing week, bro." He immediately went to an O2 shop in Aintree to purchase a new phone and SIM card to ensure his operation continued without disruption. Following Dean's subsequent release from custody, Hayes called him, "You daft bastard, you're driving around with my phone. It's worth 200,000 quid, lad." Hayes's rage then turned into outright threats against one of his co-defendants, Kaylee Wilson. Hayes, who had used Wilson's Monzo and Revolut bank accounts to launder tens of thousands of pounds of criminal proceeds, apparently believed she had reported Dean and Newton to the police. He was captured speaking to Harrison about her, telling him, "I'll smash her head in, I swear. I will stab someone or I will slash the face right off them. I have had enough." When Wilson later tried to plead her innocence, Hayes coldly told her, "You ratted that other phone, and now you're trying to rat us because you've been fed off." Wilson later admitted to conspiracy to conceal criminal property. The police investigation went far beyond Hayes's personal cocaine line and the firearms. The OCG ran sophisticated operations covering multiple types of drugs and production. Anthony Bennett was recorded by the audio bug discussing a lab for the production of crack cocaine at the second flat on Condren Road North. This was the home address of Matthew Ball, who was referred to by the defendants as G and the Wags, or G-Wags. When police searched Matthew Ball's apartment, which was unoccupied during the raid, the sheer volume of drugs found was shocking. They recovered nearly a kilogram of 85% pure crack cocaine, packaged in 18 knotted plastic packages. They also found bags containing 50 grams and 27 grams of cocaine, alongside a total of 132 grams of heroin. Other items recovered included an adulterant substance, a knuckle duster, and various drug paraphernalia. Other OCG members had specific logistics roles. Stephen Sutter's home address on Osborne Road in Litherland, for example, was used specifically for the task of bagging up drugs for onward distribution. In addition to the cocaine and crack operation, another core member, James Harrison, ran a huge separate cannabis business. Harrison, aged 28, used the pseudonym Budfellas and offered various different strains of high-quality cannabis for sale through platforms like Instagram and Telegram. The quantities in Harrison's cannabis operation were enormous. In the single month before his arrest on July 15th, he was shown to have offered to supply in excess of 41 kilograms to his customers. Experts estimated that, over a 6-month period, the total amount offered would have risen to very large quantities of around 248 kilograms. The street value of Harrison's cannabis empire alone was estimated to be between £2.4 million and £3.7 million. Harrison had even travelled to Manchester alongside Hayes and Bennett on one occasion to collect 2 large carrier bags, suspected by police to contain cannabis. The proactive police work eventually led to the arrests of key players. Matthew Ball, for instance, was arrested for drug offences after he fled from a vehicle that officers were trying to stop on October 17th.
Arrested for possession with intent to supply Class A and conspiracy to possess 2x Scorpion machine pistols with ammunition and 1x Springfield pistol with ammunition, okay? Don't say anything may harm you to offend you, don't mention, when questioned, something which later rely on court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
Hayes, Harrison, Medway and Bennett were all stopped in their vehicles in the Sefton area. In one of the stopped vehicles, officers found bags containing clothing, passports and large sums of cash, suggesting a sudden, desperate attempt to flee or dispose of evidence. Officers acted with courage and speed to detain the offenders in their homes, in cars, and on the street. Following the meticulous 15-month investigation and the overwhelming evidence gathered, especially from the surveillance device, all 12 individuals pleaded guilty to various serious offences. On Friday, October 10th, the full sentencing concluded. Joshua Adam Hayes, the boss man of Ryfield Lane in Litherland, admitted conspiracy to possess firearms and ammunitions, possession of a firearm when prohibited for life, 2 counts of conspiracy to possess ammunition without a certificate, conspiracy to supply cocaine, and conspiracy to conceal criminal property. Hayes was handed the longest sentence, 20 years in prison.
So again, just that's your property that you got left there, mate. Keep hold of that. Your money's going to go in the bag in front of you and be seized now.
Open that door, do it now. What's your name? Out the car, do it now. I'm not doing nothing, boss. Appreciate you saying that, just trying to find out what's going on, mate. Okay, who's the car? Who's the car?
Anthony John Bennett, aged 31, was locked up for 17 years and 7 months. Bennett admitted conspiracy to possess prohibited firearms and ammunition for sale or transfer, 2 counts of conspiracy to possess ammunition without a certificate, conspiracy to supply Class B drugs, ketamine and cannabis, and production of crack cocaine. James Harrison, the Budfellas cannabis manager, was given 15.5 years behind bars. Harrison, aged 28, admitted conspiracy to possess prohibited firearms and ammunition for sale or transfer, 2 counts of conspiracy to possess ammunition without a certificate, and conspiracy to supply Class B drugs, ketamine and cannabis.
Get down! Get down now! Get down now! Get down now!
An assistant there, however, it may be a quick movement for
Sit there, lads. You're right.
Georgie Medway, aged 21, who was directly linked by DNA to one of the Scorpion guns, was handed 12 years. Medway admitted conspiracy to possess prohibited firearms and ammunition for sale or transfer, 2 counts of conspiracy to possess ammunition without a certificate, conspiracy to supply Class B drugs, ketamine and cannabis, and production of crack cocaine. Matthew Reese Ball, aged 28, whose flat was used as the crack cocaine production lab, was jailed for 9 years and 2 months. He admitted supplying heroin, crack cocaine and possession with intent to supply Class A drugs, cocaine and heroin. Stephen Sutter, aged 33, whose home was used for bagging up drugs, was jailed for 6 years and 8 months. He admitted conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, conspiracy to conceal criminal property, and possession of cannabis.
I'll tack in the bedroom. Stand back from the door. Go on there, mate. Aaron O'Brien. Aaron O'Brien. Aaron, come here a minute. You're under arrest at the minute, alright? Certain supply of Class A, alright? Don't need to say anything, but now you fancy do not mention my question. If you say maybe give evidence, yeah, like switch
Aaron O'Brien, aged 24, who was left in charge of the graft phone, was locked up for 6 years and 8 months. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply Class A and B drugs and conspiracy to conceal criminal property. Michael James Caldwell, aged 40, at whose Litherland flat the 3 firearms were found concealed in the wall, was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He admitted conspiracy to possess prohibited firearms, 2 counts of conspiracy to possess ammunition without a certificate, and conspiracy to possess prohibited ammunition. Kaylee Wilson, aged 33, who laundered Hayes's criminal proceeds, was sentenced to 4 years and 10 months. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and conspiracy to conceal criminal property. Adam Dean, aged 35, who drove Newton when he was arrested with cash, was jailed for 4 years and 8 months. He admitted conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and conspiracy to conceal criminal property. John Newton, aged 33, arrested with cash while a passenger in Dean's car, received a total of 4 years. He admitted conspiracy to supply Class A and B drugs. Finally, Thomas Ball, the youngest member at 18 whose DNA was found on 2 of the seized firearms, was handed 4 years in a Young Offenders Institute. He admitted conspiracy to possess prohibited firearms, supplying Class A drugs, heroin, crack cocaine, and being concerned in the supply of Class B drugs, ketamine and cannabis. Following the sentencing, Detective Chief Inspector Tony Roberts of Merseyside Police confirmed the huge significance of the result, stating that he was in no doubt that communities across Merseyside are safer now that these individuals are behind bars. He reiterated the extreme danger posed by this OCG. Members of this OCG possessed weapons such as the Scorpion that have been used to kill innocent people in Merseyside. DCI Roberts explained the core destructive nature of these groups, noting that victims have died after being caught in the crossfire of disputes between groups like this who depend on violence, threats, and intimidation to maintain their trade in illegal drugs. The investigation's success was credited to the officers' dedication and commitment. Their inquiries established that these criminals were in possession of dangerous weapons, significant quantities of drugs, and large sums of illicit cash. The fact that these officers acted with courage and speed to detain the offenders in various locations, in their homes, in cars, and on the street, was pivotal in securing justice. DCY Roberts concluded by stressing the importance of continued police work. So many lives have been torn apart by OCGS, but we continue to work on a daily basis to rid our communities of them, bring offenders like these to justice, and remove the extremely dangerous weapons and illicit drugs they possess from circulation. This massive sentence, totaling over 100 years, shows the worthwhile nature of those efforts to protect the community. This UK true crime documentary tells the story of ordinary people who made extraordinary mistakes at British airports, transforming dream holidays into cold handcuffs. From Liverpool to Manchester, these are the tales of couriers, desperate individuals, and outright criminals who gambled their freedom on a single flight, only to discover that customs officers are always watching. Before we dive into the first case, please take one quick moment. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what you think of these shocking cases. It helps us bring you more in-depth true crime stories. Thank you. Now, let's go. Danielle Shields had made the trip 15 times, 15 flights between Liverpool and the island of Jersey since December 2023. To the customs officers charting her movements, that pattern was a screaming red flag. But it wasn't until February 8, 2024 that they decided to make their move. The 43-year-old from Liverpool touched down in Jersey carrying just £20 cash and one bank card. When questioned about her stay, she dropped a name: the Royal Yacht Hotel, one of the island's most exclusive establishments. A luxury stay for someone travelling so light. Officers noted the inconsistency, but let her pass. 24 hours later, Shields returned for her outbound flight. This time, customs were waiting. A search of her single piece of luggage revealed £2,336 in cash, plus £800 in gift vouchers and receipts for high-end clothing. Then, the damaging admission. Shields confessed to having an additional £1,360 concealed internally. Officers also noticed a brand new Tag Heuer watch on her wrist, worth thousands. The final piece of the puzzle arrived when they retrieved a package she'd posted back to the mainland. Inside, an empty Tag Heuer box and a receipt for the £2,100 timepiece. Shields broke. She confessed to exporting cash she suspected was the proceeds of crime, likely drug sales. And this wasn't her first run. Those 15 journeys weren't holidays, they were collection runs. She was a courier, a money mule paid to ferry drug profits from Jersey back to the northwest. At Jersey's Royal Court, the gravity of her role was laid bare. Moving cash, the Crown Advocate argued, is the lifeblood of the illegal drug trade. Without couriers like Shields, the entire operation collapses. Shields' defense claimed she was pressured, caught up in something she regretted. But Lieutenant Bailiff Anthony Olson was unmoved. Shields knew she was dealing with drug money. She was jailed for 21 months. The woman who had flown between Liverpool and Jersey 15 times in just over a year now traded the Royal Yacht Hotel for a cell provided by His Majesty's Prison Service. Her vital link in the drug chain was severed. Emma Louise Llewellyn arrived at Jersey Airport on November 8, 2023, aboard a flight from Liverpool. The 39-year-old from Stoke-on-Trent claimed she was visiting a friend for the weekend, but customs officers had a hunch. A routine search of her bags turned up swabs positive for cocaine. Llewellyn first denied it, then admitted using cocaine the week prior. The officers weren't convinced. They ordered a full search. Hidden on her person, they found a wrapped package containing 52 grams of Class A drugs. When asked about the discovery, Llewellyn's response was chillingly dismissive. She told officers it was just a bit of coke. In her interview, she confessed she was paid £1,000 for the delivery, but she also claimed she owed £350 to a man she knew only as Porn Star, who gave her the drugs to clear her debt. A vague description of a man with a fat belly was all she offered, a convenient villain to shoulder the blame. The 52 grams, which Llewellyn called a bit, had an estimated street value of £13,000. At sentencing, the court heard about her motivation and vulnerability, but the facts were undeniable. She knowingly transported a massive amount of Class A drugs for financial gain. The senior manager for Jersey Customs emphasized the clear deterrent. The huge risks outweigh the promise of easy money. Llewellyn was sentenced to 4 years and 6 months in prison. Her £350 debt to a man who may not even exist had cost her nearly half a decade of her life. The 52 grams of just a bit of coke sealed her fate. Edward Nesbitt, a former boxer and father of 2 from Northern Ireland, landed at Manchester Airport on March 4, 2024, on a flight from Amsterdam. He picked up a suitcase from the carousel and headed straight for the Nothing to Declare channel. He didn't make it. When customs stopped him, Nesbitt offered a desperate lie. He claimed he had stolen the suitcase. When officers opened the bag, the lie collapsed. Inside were 23 kilograms of cannabis, valued at over £93,000. Nesbitt was immediately arrested, but this was a coordinated trap. Earlier that morning, Yok Woon, a 43-year-old Uber driver from Malaysia, had arrived from Singapore. CCTV showed Woon entering the baggage reclaim but leaving without his luggage, the same suitcase Nesbitt later picked up. Drug gangs use this tactic. One person brings the bag in, another collects it. If one gets caught, the other walks free. This time, both were caught. Woon was arrested a week later when he returned for a flight to Abu Dhabi. Both men answered no comment to every question. At Manchester Crown Court, the prosecutor stated both men were couriers who received very limited financial benefit. Woon, who was using a stick due to gout and had no prior record, was called naive. Nesbitt, already serving a suspended sentence, claimed he was handed an offer he felt he could not refuse. Judge Hilary Manley acknowledged their personal difficulties, Nesbitt's mental health issues, Woon's lack of criminal history. But she was clear. They had acted in tandem to import cannabis and deserved immediate imprisonment. The Uber driver received 10 months. The former boxer received 12 months. They gambled their freedom on a single suitcase. They both lost. Zheng Chao and Lei Wat arrived at Manchester Airport on April 16, 2024. The 30-year-old man and 25-year-old woman claimed they were married and traveling from Malaysia for their honeymoon. It was a romantic story, meticulously rehearsed and utterly fake. Border Force officers stopped the couple for inspection. When their suitcases were opened, the romantic story ended. Inside, officers found a total of 56 vacuum-sealed packages of cannabis. The wholesale value, £99,000. The honeymoon was over. Chow refused to talk. Watt claimed she thought the suitcases held alcohol and that a third party was supposed to collect the packages in exchange for payment. Neither had any prior convictions. At their sentencing, the couple sat in the dock, sharing a sad embrace and a kiss. The drugs were destined for distribution across Britain, and the couple were simply the couriers, promised only £800 each. The judge told them they had been expecting a significant financial advantage and had little regard for the consequences. Both pleaded guilty to fraudulent evasion of prohibition. They each received a matching sentence of 1 year and 3 months imprisonment. Their brief venture into the United Kingdom, built on a lie, cost them their freedom and guaranteed a deportation back to Malaysia. Larissa Linz made her first and only visit to the United Kingdom on August 24, 2024. The 27-year-old Brazilian mother of 4 flew to Manchester via France and Portugal. She carried a small pink cabin bag and told Border Force officers she was here to walk around and research nice places. She was friendly and cooperative. Too friendly. When asked if she was carrying anything illegal, Linz adamantly denied it. Then, in a catastrophic, self-inflicted move, she offered up her mobile phone. She wanted to show officers photos from her time in France, proof of her innocent tourism. As officers scrolled, they found something that stopped them cold, a photograph of white pellets. They recognized them instantly as concealed cocaine packages. Linz was arrested immediately. The photograph was her confession. Under questioning, Linz admitted she had swallowed pellets before leaving Brazil and had them inserted internally. She was taken to the hospital, where over several hours she passed 99 pellets. A further search found additional pellets hidden in her bra. Total haul, 923 grams of cocaine, with a street value of £72,000. Linz confessed she was promised the equivalent of just £1,400 in Brazilian currency. Her defense described her as being in a state of sheer desperation, exploited by criminals who threatened her when she tried to back out. Had any pellet burst, she could have died. Judge Patrick Field acknowledged the exploitation, but noted the seriousness of the crime. The mother of 4, who had come to research nice places, was jailed for 3 years. Her friendly gesture with her phone ensured she'd spend a year behind bars, paying an enormous price for a small sum of money. Sophie Bannister and Levi April Wally cultivated a perfect jet-set lifestyle online, filling Instagram with bikini shots from Ibiza, Thailand, and New York. But behind the glossy facade was debt and desperation. In December 2023, that reality caught up with them at Birmingham International Airport. The two friends, 30 and 31, returned from what they called a shopping trip to New York. When UK Border Force checked their bags, the shopping trip was exposed as a massive drug run. Inside their suitcases were 70 heat-sealed packages containing 35.5 kilograms of cannabis, street value over £160,000. Wally frantically insisted the packages were watches. The truth was in their text messages. The friends were part of a coordinated smuggling plan. The whole thing started with a message on Instagram: travel to New York, bring back some watches. Bannister was in debt. Wally needed to escape personal issues. They were far from naive. The court heard Bannister's share was worth £40,500. Wally's was £121,500. The consequences were immediate and brutal. Bannister was kicked out of her family home. Wally lost her job as a nurse and had her license suspended. The judge chose not to impose immediate prison time, giving Bannister a 20-month sentence suspended for 18 months and Wally a 16-month suspended sentence. But the Instagram influencers who once flaunted their lifestyle now carry criminal convictions that will follow them forever, a painful reminder that social media lies can't hide 70 packages of cannabis. Cormac Graham, a 24-year-old father from Old Swan, thought he was untouchable. For more than 2 years, he ran a booming cannabis business through Instagram, operating under the username Liverpool Loud Packs. His digital shop window attracted nearly 3,000 followers. It was brazen, sophisticated, and highly visible. On July 6, 2024, Graham returned to Liverpool John Lennon Airport from a trip to Amsterdam. Matrix officers were waiting. A search revealed small amounts of cannabis and mushrooms for personal use, a minor offence. But the officers were looking for something bigger. Police had already linked Graham to the Liverpool Loudpacks account. His email, phone number, and even the IP address of his mother's house were used to run the profile. The evidence was overwhelming. Graham wasn't a casual user, he was the head of an active drug supply business. This was his second drug supply conviction, having previously served time for dealing heroin and crack cocaine. His defense barrister blamed ADHD and self-medication, painting a picture of a troubled young man who had lapsed back into criminality. But Judge Robert Trevor Jones focused on the facts. The Instagram operation was sophisticated, and the 3,000 followers proved it was a highly active and popular account. Graham was sentenced to 12 months imprisonment. The man who built his business in plain sight on social media was reminded that digital footprints never disappear. Customs officers know how to scroll through Instagram just as well as his customers. For Graham, the Liverpool Loudpacks operation was permanently shut down. That's the cost of one bad flight: freedom. Thank you for watching TGS Crime Documentaries. Subscribe, like, and comment. Which case shocked you most, and why? Greed, debt pressure, or pure naivety?
A 23-year-old getting arrested at Ibiza's most legendary nightclub sounds like just another party gone wrong. But for Eddie Burton, it was the dramatic end to a £20 million drug empire that spanned 3 countries. Even crazier, he built it all while living like a fugitive playboy across Europe, with his girlfriend smuggling drugs in her luggage and their operation hidden behind vacation photos and party lifestyle posts. And through it all, these two had one massive problem haunting them. They owed money to someone called Chog, and that debt would drive them to take bigger and bigger risks. This is the insane story of how a Liverpool lad turned a criminal debt into a multi-million-pound drug empire. This is TGS True Crime Documentaries. If you're ready for more, go ahead and hit subscribe. Eddie Burton was the last person you'd picture running an international drug smuggling operation, and there were 3 big reasons why. First, his age. Eddie was only 23, barely out of his teens. Second, he looked nothing like a criminal mastermind. When police finally met him face to face, they were stunned by how ordinary he seemed, just a young guy from Liverpool who could have been anyone's mate down the pub. The third reason Eddie seemed harmless was his background. He was just another working-class kid from Merseyside. Nothing about his early life screamed international drug lord, but there was something about Eddie that changed everything. One mistake that would send him spiraling into a world of vacuum-packed drugs, modified fuel tanks, and debts to dangerous people. Eddie had already been caught dealing before. In spring 2021, he was arrested and charged for his part in a drug supply operation in Oswestry. But instead of facing the music, Eddie made a decision that would define the next 3 years of his life. He ran. And for demonetization purposes, we're going to be referring to cocaine as blow throughout this story. Eddie fled to Europe thinking he could lay low and start fresh, but running from the law doesn't make your problems disappear. If anything, it makes them worse. And Eddie was about to learn that lesson the hard way. In Europe in 2021, he thought he was free. No more worrying about UK police knocking on his door. No more looking over his shoulder walking down Liverpool streets. But freedom came with a price. Eddie was broke, far from home, and owed money to some very dangerous people. That's when someone called Chog entered the picture. We don't know much about Chog, but what we do know is terrifying. Chog was the kind of person who could make threats that Eddie took seriously. Messages later found on Eddie's phone revealed the truth. Eddie wasn't living it up in Europe by choice. He was working off a massive debt. Eddie bounced between Holland, Germany and Spain, always moving, always working, but he wasn't alone in this. Back in Liverpool, his girlfriend Shun Banks was about to become his most valuable asset. Shun was 25, 2 years older than Eddie and completely devoted to him. When Eddie called, she answered. When he needed money, she sent it. When he needed drugs smuggled, she packed her bags. By 2022, Eddie had found his base of operations. An apartment in North Amsterdam became his headquarters. But this wasn't some glamorous penthouse, it was a drug factory. Eddie spent his days vacuum packing hundreds of kilograms of blow, heroin and ketamine. The scale was mind-blowing. We're talking about over 300 kilograms of drugs being processed in a single flat. Even their dog Marley was part of the operation. Having a pet made Eddie and Cian look like a normal couple to neighbours. Just 2 young people in love, living in Amsterdam with their dog. Nobody suspected that behind closed doors, Eddie was running one of the biggest drug importation schemes the UK had ever seen. The operation, by summer 2022, Eddie's operation was in full swing. The plan was brilliantly simple. Vacuum pack massive quantities of drugs in the Amsterdam flat, load them onto lorries, drive those lorries through Europe to Dover, sell the drugs in the UK, use the profits to pay back Chog and keep the operation running. But Eddie couldn't do it alone. That's where Cian became crucial. She wasn't just the girlfriend supporting him from back home, she was an active participant in the smuggling operation. Between June 2022 and October 2023, Cian travelled to the Netherlands and Spain every month to visit Eddie. To anyone watching, she looked like a devoted girlfriend visiting her boyfriend who was working abroad. The reality was very different. Cian was there to help prepare drug shipments, launder money, and personally smuggle smaller amounts of drugs back to the UK in her luggage. On 2 occasions in August 2022, she walked through Liverpool John Lennon Airport with blow and ketamine hidden in her bags. Airport security never suspected a thing. The messages between Eddie and Cian revealed just how deep she was in the operation. When Eddie told her he was going to be busy with 135 bits, she responded with "Wowza." She knew exactly what he meant. In their world, bits meant kilograms of drugs. Eddie was about to process 135 kilograms of illegal substances. On another occasion, Eddie mentioned he was getting a vacuum packing machine to package tops, their slang term for blow. Cian knew the code, she knew the business, and she was all in. The first strike. On July 3rd, 2022, everything changed. Border Force officers at Dover stopped a lorry during routine inspections. What they found inside shocked even experienced customs officials. Packed into boxes in a little shopping bag were 90 kilograms of ketamine and 50 kilograms of blow. The street value was over £6.5 million. But this wasn't just any random drug bust. Forensic analysis revealed something that would send Eddie's world crashing down. His DNA was found on a packet containing white powder marked Jota K1. The drugs were being smuggled for someone called Jota, but Eddie's fingerprints were all over the operation. 2 days later, Eddie broke the news to Sian. The lorry had been stopped. In a panic, Sian worried that her fingerprints would be on the bags. Eddie tried to calm her down, telling her that because she'd never been arrested, her prints wouldn't be on file anyway, but Eddie knew he was in trouble. His fingerprints were definitely on file from his previous arrest. The messages in the following days show just how the pressure was building. Sian complained to Eddie about money, saying she worked all week only to run out of cash by the weekend, while he earns enough in 10 minutes to last 3 months. The easy money was addictive, but the risks were getting higher. Doubling down, most people would have stopped after losing £6.5 million worth of drugs to customs. But Eddie wasn't most people. He was in debt to Chog, and that debt wasn't going away just because one shipment got caught. If anything, the pressure was mounting. Between August 5th and 9th, Shan visited Amsterdam again. This time they were preparing something even bigger. While she was there, a second lorry left Poland, heading for Dover. But Eddie had learned from the first bust. This time the drugs were better hidden. Border Force officers intercepted the second lorry on August 12th. When they searched it, they initially found nothing. Then they discovered something incredible. The fuel tank had been modified. It had a secret hatch that, when opened, revealed packages containing 142 kilograms of blow and 25 kilograms of heroin. The street value was around £12.7 million. Once again, forensic analysis came back positive for Eddie's fingerprints and DNA. He was connected to both shipments. In total, Eddie's operation had attempted to smuggle 307 kilograms of drugs worth £20 million into the UK. It was one of the largest drug importation attempts in recent history. While all this was happening, Eddie and Sian were living like international playboys. Eddie moved between Amsterdam, Spain and Germany like he was on an extended European vacation. Sian flew out monthly to visit him, posting pictures that made their life look glamorous and carefree. But behind the Instagram posts and party photos, the pressure was building. Messages show Eddie complaining that although he had paid off £50,000 of his debt to Chog, it had actually risen to £16,000 because he was being blamed for not vacuum packing the drug hauls properly. In the drug world, mistakes are expensive, and Eddie was making costly ones. Around the same time, Eddie started getting paranoid. He told Sian he was worried his Amsterdam flat was being watched. Chog told him to move everything to Galloway's, presumably another location. The walls were closing in, but Eddie kept pushing forward. Sian visited again between September 30th and October 6th, but the relationship was showing strain. The constant pressure, the travel, the paranoia, it was taking its toll on both of them, yet they couldn't stop. The debt to Chog kept them trapped in the cycle, living on borrowed time. By late 2022, Eddie was exhausted. The vacuum packing, the constant moving, the pressure from Chog, it was all becoming too much. When the offer of more work came up in Spain, he jumped at the chance. Maybe a change of scenery would help. Maybe Spain would be safer than Amsterdam. Eddie relocated to Spain and Sian continued her monthly visits. To anyone watching, they looked like a young couple making the most of life in Europe. Eddie was living between luxury locations. Sian was traveling constantly, and they seemed to have unlimited money for their lifestyle. But they weren't tourists, they were fugitives, and fugitives always get caught eventually. The irony is that Eddie's downfall had nothing to do with the massive drug importation scheme he'd been running. In August 2023, Spanish police arrested him at Pacha nightclub in Ibiza for completely unrelated drug dealing offences. Of all the places to get caught, one of the most famous nightclubs in the world, surrounded by partygoers and celebrities. Even then, Eddie tried to stay one step ahead. He was using the false name Ewan Banks, taking Sian's surname as his alias, but it didn't matter. Once police had him in custody, it was only a matter of time before they connected him to the massive investigation that had been building in the UK. Eddie's arrest in Ibiza set off a chain reaction. He was extradited to Germany first, where he faced drug charges there. Meanwhile, back in the UK, investigators were building their case against both Eddie and Cian. In December 2023, police arrested Cian in Liverpool, the loyal girlfriend who had travelled to Europe every month, who had smuggled drugs in her luggage, who had laundered money and prepared drug shipments. Her time was up too. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Phone records showed their criminal communications. Forensic analysis connected Eddie to both lorry seizures. Bank records revealed the money laundering operation. Text messages exposed their roles in the conspiracy. In February 2024, both Eddie and Cian appeared in court. Cian pleaded guilty to 7 charges, including importing Class A drugs and money laundering. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Eddie's case was more complicated. During his February court appearance, he handed the judge a letter claiming he was a victim of modern slavery. He wrote that threats had been made against his family's life and he'd been forced to go abroad to pay off debts. Judge Simon Taylor wasn't buying it. The sentencing was adjourned, but Eddie knew it was hopeless. As he was led to the cells, he shouted that he had lied in the letter and it's going to be the same outcome regardless. In September 2024, Eddie appeared in court for the final time. Any hope of avoiding a lengthy prison sentence had evaporated. Judge Taylor sentenced him to 19 years in prison. At 23 years old, Eddie would be in his 40s before he tasted freedom again. The operation that started as a way to pay back a debt to Chog had ended in complete disaster. Eddie and Cian's relationship was over. Their freedom was gone. Their future was destroyed. NCA Senior Investigating Officer John Turner summed it up perfectly. Burton, with Banks' help, attempted to smuggle huge quantities of harmful drugs into the UK, believing he could operate with impunity overseas. The drugs, had they reached their final destination, would have had a destructive impact on our communities. Lessons in greed. Eddie Burton's story is a perfect example of how trying to solve one problem with crime only creates bigger problems. He started by fleeing a relatively minor drug charge in the UK. That decision led him into debt with dangerous people. That debt forced him into international drug smuggling. The smuggling made him a target for law enforcement across multiple countries. At every step, Eddie had the choice to stop. He could have returned to the UK and faced his original charges. He could have cut ties with Chog and found legitimate work in Europe. He could have stopped after the first lorry was seized at Dover. Instead, he kept doubling down. The lifestyle, the money, the power, it was all addictive, and Cian got caught up in it too. Her loyalty to Eddie cost her 5 years of her life. Today, Eddie is serving his 19-year sentence, and Cian has been released after serving her time. The £20 million drug empire that seemed so untouchable from their European hideouts turned out to be nothing more than an elaborate house of cards. And when it fell, it buried them both. The boy from Liverpool who thought he could outrun the law learned the hardest possible lesson. In the end, the law always catches up. Whether it's in a courtroom in the UK or a nightclub in Ibiza, justice finds a way. Thanks for watching, and remember, you are awesome.